So rounding out the day is our next presenter, Elise Hochhalter. She is a conservation technician with the San Francisco Public Library Preservation Unit. Elise specializes in art and science, protecting the treasure family material from letters and photos to scrapbook and to official documents. In this session, you'll learn or show you what is the practical ways or guidance to preserve your, special photographs, documents to ensure that they continue telling your family's story for generations to come. And let's welcome Elise.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me for the last presentation of this very information-packed 2 days. My name is Elise, and as Richard said, I work in the preservation unit here at the San Francisco Public Library, and I'm part of a team that takes care of and repairs the library's physical collections of books, paper documents, and photographs. So I'm going to be speaking to you today about strategies and techniques that you can use to protect and extend the life of the physical collections that are special to you and your family. As I mentioned, I will be focusing on physical paper-based collections in this presentation, and by paper-based, I mean books, papers, official documents, and photos primarily. I'll cover tips for safely storing your collections, and what kinds of storage materials we recommend or don't recommend, how to preserve the information connected to your photos and documents, how to safely handle your collections, how special considerations for photo albums and scrapbooks, how to care for rare and special books, and how to prevent and address water damage and mold. If you do nothing else, paying attention to the environment in which you store your collections is the most consequential tool that you have to ensure that they survive into the future. If you have loose materials, keep those items together in folders, ideally with some system of organization. Store folders in boxes or plastic bins, and of course, label the containers. Keep your collections in a clean and dry indoor space that's out of direct sunlight. The area that you choose should ideally maintain a stable temperature and humidity. This most often means that you should avoid your attics, your basements, garages, sheds, and outdoor spaces, if at all possible. These spaces can be prone to leaks, flooding, environmental fluctuations, and pests, and they often go unattended for long periods of time. It's very important to lay eyes on your collections and observe the conditions of the environment in which they're being stored. This is so that you can catch and address problems as they arise, instead of, a leak happening 6 months ago and you don't discover it until it's sort of too late to address it. Oh, sorry about that. Oh. The standard for collections of books and paper in libraries and museums is approximately 70 degrees Fahrenheit and 50% relative humidity. This standard is based on human comfort. So a helpful rule of thumb is that if your storage space is uncomfortable for you, like your hot attic, then it's probably not safe for your collections. Don't worry too much about temperatures and relative humidity. Don't worry too much about storage spaces being too cold, as long as the humidity is low. It's a little bit counterintuitive, but it's helpful to remember that as temperatures go up, the relative humidity goes down, and then the inverse of that is also true. As temperatures go down, relative humidity goes up. So that's why sometimes cold spaces can be excessively damp, so pay attention to that. Lower temperatures and relative humidity below 50% are actually best for photographs. and film negatives. So this is just to slow deterioration. So if you have to put something in your attic, then make sure it's not your collection of photographs. Interestingly, a lot of libraries and museums actually have cold or frozen storage for their collections of film and photographs, film negatives. We don't have that here, unfortunately, but that is the ideal standard. That's obviously not practical in this case, but it's just something to keep in mind. For photographs, film, colder temperatures with low relative humidity is best. These benchmarks may sound really difficult to monitor or achieve, but with some relatively cheap equipment, like a dehumidifier, a fan, if you know that you have storage spaces that are excessively humid, and then also, most importantly, a temperature and humidity monitor. A lot of people have temperature monitors in their home, but that temperature monitor may not read the relative humidity. So you can get a separate hygrometer, which is just a humidity sensor. These are really simple and cheap tools. I just checked online today, and you can get a hygrometer that's $20. So they're actually really cheap and affordable. So just adding that information to your toolbox is really helpful because it will help you address things if problems start to arise. Remember that perfect stability is not necessary, and trying to chase perfect stability is actually just going to be a drain on your resources and impractical. Seasonal fluctuations in a moderate climate like Northern California are generally fine, although be aware of any spaces in your home that you may have that tend to be damp in winter, like a closet that's dark, where mildew tends to grow. If that's a storage space, just check, shine a light in there, and see what you see. Most importantly, again, the best tool that you have is to maintain awareness of your spaces. So there are lots and lots and lots of different storage options. I'm going to talk about various options, but remember that the right solution for you and your situation may not perfectly align with museum and library standards. There are many different factors to consider. Most importantly, your budget and space limitations. First, I'll mention some ideal storage materials. Then I'll talk about options that might be more practical and budget-friendly. And by the way, I think we're a small enough group that if you have questions, just go ahead and ask them as they arise. We don't necessarily need to wait until the end. So just shout out at me if you have a question. The best options for storage materials come from established archival suppliers who carry materials that are chemically stable. This means that they do not contain additives that cause harm to collections. You may have noticed that paper and folders will sometimes say acid-free or lignin-free. This means that they have been specifically manufactured to not acidify over time. And this is going to be beneficial for your collections. If you have the budget, I recommend the following suppliers of archival materials: Gaylord, Archival Products, University Products, and Hollinger Metal Edge. That's okay. These suppliers carry industry standard. Oh, yes. What about for what? For storage materials? Yeah, I know, sorry. For storage materials. So the question in the back was, what about records and LPs? Let me finish my slide and then I'll address your question. These suppliers carry industry standard storage boxes, file folders, document sleeves, flat files, etc. More common storage materials that you may already have at home are perfectly serviceable too, like standard office file folders, preferably tan rather than green, and banker's boxes. I have recently gotten in the habit of saving Tyvek mailing envelopes. If any of you are familiar with the material Tyvek, you may have seen it if a neighbor is doing a home renovation, and sometimes the structure will be covered with a material called Tyvek. This is just a woven polyester or spun polyester material. It's made in a similar way to paper. But it's a really great, durable, preservation quality material that is somewhat water resistant and super cheap. So sometimes I'll get things in the mail that have been mailed to me in Tyvek envelopes, and I'll save those and use them later. So for storage materials that you may already have at home, there are a couple of questions that you should ask yourself. One, will this material cause damage to the object? The second question is it user-friendly? So can you carry it easily, or is it a box that's too large for you to carry? Those are questions that you should ask. If it's not going to cause damage to the material and it's user-friendly, then it's okay to use it, given that you've made the best decision based on your budget and your space limitations. Okay, so we had a couple of questions. One, what is the best storage option for LPs? And I would say that the best storage option for LPs is probably just a banker's box. You probably want to keep them in their original sleeves if you have them. And if you don't, then you could consider interleaving LPs with some sort of a sheet of paper, a sheet of tissue, glassine, something that will provide some barrier between one LP and the next, but in their original sleeves is probably the best. So we had another question back here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for the supplier,
Mm-hmm.
for the suppliers that you mentioned, is that like all online, or is there like a store that you can go to find?
These are
those
online
materials?
suppliers.
Okay.
Yeah. Are you interested in being able to touch the materials and see what they look like and that kind of thing? Yeah, these are all online suppliers. Library collections, like if you go to the 6th floor and look at San Francisco history collections, they will oftentimes be housed in the correct, they almost always are housed in the correct storage materials. So like a document box, exactly like one that you would get from any of these suppliers, and acid-free, lignin-free archival folders. So if you're looking for like an example of what they are, I don't know of a local shop that you can go in and look at them. Yeah.
Hold your question.
No. So the question was, am I saying lithium-free? I am not. I'm saying lignin-free. Lignin, Lignin. This is getting into the weeds a little bit, but the plant material that is used to produce paper has lignins in it. This is just it's like a building block of plants. It sort of helps them stand tall. Trees have a lot of lignin in them. It gives them rigidity. So if you just cut down a tree, put it through a wood chipper, break it down, make it into a pulp, that actually, it requires a lot of processing and a lot of additives to soften it enough to make it into a suitable paper product, and the lignins are still in it. And the reason that lignins are a problem is because lignins will turn into acid over time as they're exposed to environmental pollutants, air, whatever. So they will just age and they will make the material that they are embedded in acidic. So that's what causes the discoloration and brittleness in a newspaper, for example, that's old. So anyway, getting into the weeds a little bit, but that's what that means if you see it, acid-free, lignin-free. That's a good thing. Yes?
Let's use the microphone, Sue. Yeah.
I like doing scrapbooking.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking for glues and albums, whatnot, that say archival safe. Is that enough, or should I look for, what did you say? Acid-free and?
Oh, so are we
lignin-free?
talking about adhesives now?
Yeah.
Okay, so adhesives when I say acid-free, I'm talking about paper products. For adhesives, I would recommend not putting any adhesive directly on original material. So you could consider using photo corners if you're making a photo album. If you really need to use adhesive, then there are some that are better than others, like wheat starch paste, or you can get I think it's made, I can't remember what the product is called, but I think it's made of it's a seaweed product, but seaweed, it sort of like oozes a slippery, mucilaginous substance. That actually can be used as an adhesive, and there is a product, and I've seen it at art stores. So I would recommend something like that, but in general, I wouldn't recommend any adhesive directly on original materials.
Thank you.
Okay, so now for some don'ts. When storing your collections, remember to avoid using anything that rusts or anything sticky. While useful for recording notes, Post-its should not be stored or stuck directly to items in your collection. Also avoid wrapping materials in newspaper. Newsprint is highly acidic and can damage material that it comes into contact with. You may have seen at some point someone tucked a newspaper clipping into another book. I actually see it all the time in library collections. Someone just sort of, absentmindedly tucked something that was a newspaper clipping into a book, and then 50 years later, that newspaper clipping has caused significant discoloration immediately on the paper where it was in contact with. So you can actually see the shadow of that clipping in the book. Now, some collections just inherently contain newspaper and newspaper clippings, and that's okay too, but try to isolate those from other collection items that they could potentially damage. Paper clips and staples can rust over time and permanently damage materials that they come into contact with. It is hypothetically possible that you could reduce a rust stain, but that's really a job for a professional with stain reduction techniques, and it's unlikely that that stain will ever go away. So it may seem harmless when you do it, but if you leave it in a damp environment for 75 years, you may not regret it, but your child will. This is also true for rubber bands and any kind of tape. Any kind of tape is a no-no. It may seem very convenient, but tape will cause intense damage to collection items that it is in contact with, and it's essentially irreversible. There are some things that can be done by a professional using solvents and advanced stain reduction tape removal techniques, but this is very labor intensive, and the result will never be what it was before the tape was applied.
So what about a dust cover or a page that's not a tear? So, yeah, what about a dust cover of a book or a page that's torn, where you might be tempted to use some kind of tape to keep it together and not get worse, especially if you're sliding it in and out of a shelf between other books?
Yeah. Okay, so that's a great question. And I may address that later, but I'll just start by saying, consider who the book is for. Is it just for you in your lifetime and you're not worried about it in perpetuity? Then fine. Use tape because you want to be able to use it and you're not worried about it too long into the future. But if you know that this is a valuable book or an important family heirloom, then my recommendation would just be to carefully store loose items with the book, but don't actually adhere with tape. Potentially contact a professional, but just it kind of depends on your level of comfort. So anyway, I'll get to that. I have another slide where I kind of talk about this. So, binders and other soft PVC. So lastly, try not to use 3-ring binders or anything that's made of vinyl. Also, any kind of like soft, so you know how those like clear plastic sleeves that you can put in 3-ring binders, those are made of a soft plastic that's not chemically stable, and it will, over time, cause damage to the material that you have stored in it. And vinyl, PVC is made of vinyl, three-ring binders are made of vinyl, and this material is not chemically stable. It will off-gas, creating environmental pollutants that will interact with your collection items. So if you can avoid using it, do. I want to say the caveat here with all of these recommendations is that they are just that. They are recommendations. This may be the only thing that works for you at this moment, and probably some organization and system of housing is better than nothing. But slowly thinking about upgrading your storage materials is sort of what I want you to think about. Yeah?
So the clear three-ring pages, inserts that you're talking about,
Yeah.
they all say, or the ones that I've been purchasing say acid-free. So what are they then? Are they PVC? Because I thought they were something else, like a polyester.
Are you sure they
something.
say acid-free? Because
Yeah.
that's usually a tag that refers to paper products. I've never seen that referred to in a
Okay,
plastic
well then,
product.
Archival, it says
It
something.
says
that-
archival.
It says either archival or acid-free or,
Okay.
won't cause.
So without seeing it, I don't know. The important thing to note is that companies will say, this is archival, but there's actually no industry regulation that says, like, this company has to meet these standards in order to call it archival. So it's sort of on a case-by-case basis, which I know is not helpful. I suppose that's why even if you can't afford some of the materials that are at Gaylord or Archival Products or Hollinger Metal Edge, you can look at those things to get a sense of what materials are they selling, because those are industry standard materials. So you can look for that elsewhere. And all plastic will be labeled with a number. You know how on the bottom of a yogurt container you'll see number 1, number 5, number 3. Those correspond with specific types of plastics. And some are better than others, and I don't know which are better off the top of my head. But some are better than others and more chemically stable. For example, Mylar is a plastic, but it is archival. We use it all the time in the preservation lab. Here at San Francisco Public Library, Mylar is an ideal plastic. I think it's number 3 or something, but I'd have to look that up. Don't quote me on it. Yeah, it might be polypropylene. I'm not sure. But Mylar is probably the brand name, but Mylar is what we use all the time. And don't quote me on it. Preserving information is an important aspect of all of this that can be easier to forget. Maybe we have all had the experience of finding an old family photo and realizing that someone wrote detailed information on the back with the date and the place and the photo and the place the photo was taken and the full name of everyone in that photo. And you felt so grateful because without it, you would have never known who these people were or where it was taken. And we've probably all had the reverse experience of finding albums full of people and places and nothing written on the back, and you have no idea where this was taken or who these people are. So, that information could be lost forever. I saw some head shaking, so I won't ask if anybody else has had experiences like this, but I certainly have. You can see that this photo was written on with what looks like it was probably a blue ballpoint pen. And we've all done this. And if this is the only thing that you have to write with, then use it. But if you can, I would instead recommend a soft pencil. The standard number 2 pencils are fine, but you can go to any art store like Blick or Flax, and they will have a selection of pencils that have an even softer core. And this is just so that you can avoid potentially making an impression into the paper support and actually damaging the emulsion side of the photograph. Pen might seem more permanent, but inks can fade, but pencil will not. Markers can also sometimes bleed, and wet ink will transfer to other items in your collection, so pencil is always best. Be sure also to label your containers. The more detail, the better. You'll thank yourself later. I also recommend making a list of what you have, especially when it comes to important family papers. This list can allow you to actually add more detail than you might want to write on the back of a photo or a note on an original document. It will be very helpful if your collection is passed on to someone else someday. So I sometimes call that a collection inventory. You could just call it a list, but just a document that fully describes the items or the boxes in your collection is really helpful to have. If the only consideration when talking about collection preservation was longevity, I would recommend putting your objects in a temperature and humidity controlled safe and throwing away the key. But this solution robs us of the joy of maintaining and experiencing and sharing our personal collections. So here are some things to remember when handling your precious objects. Handle your items sparingly. Every time you pick up a book or unfold a delicate letter, you introduce the potential for damage. When you do choose to handle these precious objects, be intentional and careful. Always handle items on a clean and dry surface. This is especially important for paper-based collections that are extremely sensitive to moisture, especially photographs. But all paper-based collections, as you know, they will immediately absorb any moisture or liquid that's nearby. So I like to not only visually ensure that a space or a surface is clean, I just clean it before I spread out any documents or paper. Because you may not see grease or you may not see something that will transfer onto your object. So just give it a wipe down. And now to wade into a potentially controversial subject, to glove or not to glove. You've probably seen in movies and TV and on TV shows, librarians will be wearing white gloves. That is not recommended by paper and book specialists. It may surprise you to know. White cotton gloves are only used in rare circumstances when you're handling metal objects or something that can tarnish due to the oils on your skin. After hand washing, any oil that remains on your skin is not significant enough to cause damage to book and paper objects. And actually, white gloves can reduce your tactile sensitivity. So it's actually better to have clean, dry hands when handling books and paper. The exception to the no gloves rule is, as I said, if you're handling, rare and valuable metal objects. Sometimes books will have metal components, but that's rare. You probably won't handle that unless you're in a special collections library. Photographs are the exception to the no gloves rule. Blue nitrile gloves like the ones you see in this photo are perfectly fine, but you don't actually need gloves. You can just handle photos by the edges. So the way that you see this person handling the photograph is correct with or without gloves. The emulsion side of photographs, so the image side, is very sensitive to moisture and oils, and it will discolor. And so that's why we say don't touch the emulsion side and use gloves if you must. But otherwise, it's okay to handle photographs and film negatives just by holding them at the edges with your bare hands. If anybody's interested in taking a deep dive into this glove or no glove contentious issue, there's a New York Times article published about this in 2023, March of 2023, I think, called For Rare Book Librarians, It's Gloves Off, Seriously. So I would recommend checking that out. Oh, and of course, the other exception to wearing gloves, to the no gloves rule, is that if you suspect any health hazard, then it is best to always protect yourself first. Yes.
Back to the writing on the back of the photos.
Mm-hmm.
So if you hopefully can work with a relative who knows who some of these people are, and you want to enter that on the photograph, what, and they're, when you talk about emulsion, they're old, what kind of this, should you just put it on is any clean surface good, or what should you put it on so that you can write Grandma so-and-so?
Oh, I see. So when you flip over the photograph and the
Right.
emulsion side is sensitive. Yeah.
Right.
Any clean, dry surface is probably okay. If I were, so in my workspace, I have a workbench and I have different materials like a blotter paper, which is like a stiff, like cotton. It's a thick kind of felted material that's it's stiff. So I often put things on that. I think it's fine. Any clean, dry surface is totally fine. But you're right to be concerned about that. That's why I'm saying don't just visually ensure that it's clean, clean it and make sure it's dry.
Thank you.
Okay. Photo albums and scrapbooks are something that many of us have in our homes that can be very challenging to preserve. They are often bulky and heavy. Sometimes things are falling out. They might contain all kinds of different materials, not just photographs. Scrapbooks contain all different kinds of materials, and oftentimes they were glued in, sometimes they're falling out. So these are very challenging objects. Newspaper clippings also, pressed flowers, all kinds of different things. They're also really rich in information, so anything that you can do to help get them healthy again is very valuable and important. As I mentioned earlier, we want to avoid touching the surface of photographs, so exercise care when turning pages. If the album is fragile or falling apart, you can provide support so that you aren't forcing the binding open and causing more damage. So what I mean by support is, this is a small book, but imagine it was a large, heavy photo album. Rather than go like this and sort of like wrench it open, you can roll up some towels, for example, and put them on either side, or another book here and here to keep the album supported in a V shape instead of flat open with the spine fully open. Sometimes photo albums will have really heavy covers as well that are, potentially at risk of falling apart. So just keeping it at a gentle V is something to consider. And like I said, you can use anything that you have at home to achieve that. If things are falling out, I would recommend keeping them where they are and storing the album flat inside a box. You can get boxes from the suppliers I mentioned earlier. If you really feel that it's best for the object to reattach the things that are falling out, then again, really consider the type of adhesive that you use. Don't use anything that's rubber-based. You've probably all seen, most classically, a Scotch tape that was applied in the 70s, and today it's yellowed and brittle, and the actual plastic carrier is just gone. There's just that yellow, brittle adhesive that's left behind. So that's what happens to rubber-based adhesives. So think about the adhesive that you're using. Use something like a wheat starch paste, or Even sometimes glue sticks can be much better than like a rubber-based tape that's gonna, first it gets sticky and then it becomes completely useless and yellowed and stains. So really consider the adhesive that you use. If you're putting together a new album or a scrapbook, I would recommend using photo corners so that you can avoid putting adhesive directly on your items. I think I said that earlier. So photo corners are really nice, especially if you have a square object. If you don't have a square object, it's a different consideration, but every item will have unique needs, so you'll have to think about that. The type of photo album that is in this slide is probably very familiar to everyone. Does anybody have one of these at home? Yeah, these are called magnetic albums. There's nothing magnetic about them. It has sticky pages with a plastic cover, and where the page edges have turned brown, that's where the adhesive has failed. So that's a rubber-based adhesive. That's exactly what happens over time. First, a rubber-based adhesive will get stickier, and then it will just become embrittled, and it won't have any adhesive properties anymore. So the deterioration starts at the edges, where there's more exposure to light and oxygen and humidity. And the nice thing about the adhesive in something like this completely failing is that you can just take out, the photos aren't attached anymore. You can just put them in a new album. But the consideration here is that if it hasn't fully failed yet and it's still sticky, removing those photographs may not be something you want to do. It could cause damage. Yeah?
So I'm thinking about, so those pictures may have had some writing on the back which indicated something about the picture.
Possibly.
So how do you store a photograph like that? How do you make it so that you can somehow access the back of the photo information?
Well, if you have the benefit of time, eventually that adhesive will dry out, embrittle, and the photos will pop right off. So if you have the benefit of time, you could wait for that to happen. If it's really sticky still, then trying to remove the photograph will introduce the potential that you can skin off that layer of paper support where the writing is. So you have to weigh the risks, yeah.
So if you have you don't have an album and you're trying to create this archival method that you want to be able to see both sides.
Oh, mm-hmm.
Okay, so what is your recommendation?
Oh, okay. Well, I can think of a couple of different strategies, so it just depend on what your resources are and time. But you could photocopy the backside of the photograph and pair it with the original photo emulsion side up in the album. You could create an album such that there's room to notate next to the photographs. The nice thing about using photo corners, if you do decide to create an album, is that you can safely remove the photograph and be able to access the back and put it back into place. See what I mean? Does that answer your question? Yeah, I have a question back here.
I have a question. Just to piggyback on what he's saying, sometimes they say for different applications, use a dryer, let's say a heat gun or something to soften the adhesive. Would that even work here?
It is very possible, but heat could cause damage to the emulsion of your photograph, so I would hesitate to do that. If you felt compelled to do so, I would recommend very low heat, maybe even like a tacking iron. You could try on the back side of the sheet and see if you get anywhere, but stop before any heat transfers all the way through. Heat is Heat is a tool that we use to release tape, but in a situation with photographs, I would really hesitate to use it. I use it when I'm removing, tape from, a page is torn and someone has taped it back together. And I would use it in that situation, but I'm not worried about disrupting an emulsion. So, yeah.
Question.
If you put multiple albums flat in a box, will the top albums kind of compress the bottom album and ruin the photos?
I would be careful about the weight. Yeah. So minimize the number of items that you stack on top. Yeah. So by rare and special books, I would like to acknowledge that there may be books in your collection that hold more personal significance than they do monetary value, like family Bibles, for example, Grandma's old cookbook with her notes in the margins, or scrapbooks and photo albums like we were talking about just now. Does anybody have a book like that in their collection? Family Bible, old cookbook? Yeah, I saw a couple hands. I have one like that in my family. My grandmother, my mother's mother, died when she was very young, and the only artifact that my mom still has of her mother's handwriting is in a copy of Moby Dick. And this copy of Moby Dick is not a first edition. It's not signed by Melville, but it is nonetheless of extraordinary personal significance to my mom. So several years ago, I made a custom fit box for this book, cloth-covered box. And that is the ideal preservation environment for books. If you were able to, at any time, tour the stacks of special collections in any libraries, you would find that many books are housed individually in custom-fit boxes. So that is the ideal library and museum standard. In some cases, that may be something you would want to pursue, and there are local bookbinders and conservators who know how to make custom-fit boxes who can do this for you. But that's not the only solution. The way you see books stored in libraries and bookstores is perfectly suitable as well. Upright, in an upright position, compressed to a certain extent, but not so compressed that it's impossible to pull a book off the shelf. So supported and upright. This is the best storage solution for intermittent accessibility. It's best to store books on a shelf and supported in an upright position by neighboring books. So I know that sounds obvious to say, but if you are like me and you're constantly browsing the books that you have in your collection, and you pull it off the shelf and then you just throw it somewhere or lean it up against something, that's okay temporarily, but make sure that it eventually goes back in its place. This is the best storage solution if you're not going to individually house these items. You should also avoid keeping especially rare and special books, and I don't necessarily mean valuable, the books that we were talking about, off of coffee tables or in kitchens or in bathrooms. You don't actually want to keep them on display, even though they may be important to you. They need to be protected from food and liquids and excessive humidity fluctuations. Old and or frequently handled books often suffer from detached covers and loose leaves. If this is the case, be sure to keep any detached part with the book so that it doesn't get lost. So like we did have a question about that earlier, and I'll just reiterate. If you're not worried about the book beyond your own personal use, then use tape to repair it if you want. But if you do want to ensure that the book is useful and usable to the future, then the best thing to do is to just keep those objects together until they can be reattached by a professional. Don't put a rubber band around it, because the rubber band that is flexible now, in probably like only 5 years, will not actually be flexible anymore, and it may have even melted into the book. So just keeping it with the object, perhaps in an envelope, a Tyvek envelope, for example, or just next to it on the shelf. That's the best thing. Yes?
How about using cotton ribbon around it?
Yeah, that is a much better solution. We have a box of sort of like cotton, we call them quick ties, and they actually have like a cinching ring on them, and that's a good thing to do. But just cotton twine, you can tie a nice bow that isn't too tight. That's perfectly good. Yeah. Okay. Water damage and mold. Has anyone ever dealt with the mold in their home? I know I have, and mildew in my bathroom that I'm constantly battling. It's a really common problem, and it can be really stressful. Mold spores are everywhere, and if the conditions are right, mold will grow. But prevention is key. Keeping the relative humidity in your home below 60% will help keep mold from growing. The 60% number is just sort of the threshold at which mold, if it's present, is likely to grow. So the conditions are right. It may not be that you've seen it, but if humidity is sustained at 60% for long periods of time, then you know that there is a chance that mold is growing. So those are the conditions at which mold is. And in the situation of mold and mildew, it's sort of the relative humidity that's more important than temperature. So 60% and over, the conditions are right. Many of us live in older homes without HVAC, or effective HVAC. So we have plenty of places that stay cool and damp and very friendly to mold. So keep your collections off the ground and away from any areas that you know have a tendency to be damp. That's a good idea. If you have a flood in your home, whether from a leaky roof or a burst pipe, respond quickly. Know where your most important things are and make sure they're safe. If papers or photographs become wet, separate them right away and lay them flat to dry with photos emulsion side or face up. If you let wet photos dry, pressed against each other, they will stick to each other. And it will be impossible to detach them without causing damage. Stand books on their edge and fan out the pages, like in this photo. These are actually books from special collections here at San Francisco Public Library that got wet from a leak a few years ago. So it happens to us too. Keep air flowing with fans. What you can't see in this photo is that directly in front of these books, we've got fans blowing air constantly. And in a situation like this, we may leave the books fanned out with fans blowing for a week or more. We have a question back there, Richard.
With regard to wet photos that potentially have dried together, is it worth essentially soaking them again to see if you can get them apart?
That may be the only way, but I wouldn't recommend that anyone do that. I have to recommend that you would contact a professional. It's just too sensitive for me. It's your collection, so it's your prerogative, but it's a very delicate process to separate photographs that have been stuck. So,
Is it a hazard, a health hazard, to keep, the molded products, even though they've been dried out? You have to have a lot of space to dry out things.
Yeah, so active mold can be a health hazard, but even a book that if a book has at one time had active mold, but we've gone through the process of thoroughly drying and cleaning if there's any mold spores that are actually on the surface, it's not a health hazard anymore, even if there's staining. So, if there's no active mold, it's not a health hazard. The question is whether there is active mold. And if there's active mold, the health hazard to me is less of a concern. It's more that if there's active mold, it's going to grow. Use a dehumidifier if you have one. If you do encounter mold, protect yourself with PPE, personal protective equipment. I think we all know what PPE means now. That means gloves, a mask, an apron, eye protection. Your health is more important than any object. It is useful to note, though, that in any sort of large-scale collection salvage where mold is present on a vast scale, we wouldn't be dealing with it. Professional, mold collection salvage companies would probably be dealing with it. So you'd have to make that decision. On what scale are you comfortable dealing with it? Do you have the space? Do you have the fans? The other thing to remember is that once a book gets wet, and then even if it thoroughly dries and there's no active mold, it's never going to look the way it did before it got wet. Never. And no professional is going to be able to restore it to exactly the way it looked before. There are ways to, mitigate as much as possible the distortions that occur, but it will always show evidence that it has been water damaged. The other thing to note is that if something can be replaced, discard the thing that got wet and replace it. So if you have a collection of books and it's really more about the scope of the collection than about the specificity of this particular item that has sentimental value to you, then discard it and replace it, because that's going to be more satisfying, a more satisfying and quicker and easier result. And then I do have a note here about contacting a professional conservator or a property restoration company if you have the means and if the problem is on an intensely large scale. And then finally, here are some resources for you to explore further. The American Institute for Conservation, which is the professional organization that I and my colleagues are members of. They have many helpful guides for every type of material or object that you could think of, not just paper books and photographs. So if you have, a collection of Roman sculptures at home, you can take a look here and find some helpful information as well. And if you do find yourself in need of a professional conservator, the American Institute for Conservation, AIC, has a tool that will help you locate someone in your region. And there are many, 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 many conservators who are on this website and who do take private work. So I think we have a question back here, Richard.
I have two questions. One, I do have some older photo albums that have the photo corners, like everything was done correct, but the way in which they were stored, when I pull them out, they smell very musty, or like some old newspaper articles. Is there a way to try to remove that smell from something that's been sitting for too long?
Yeah, they make these. Probably you'd have to get them at Gaylord. I've never actually tried to purchase one, but at an archival supplier like Gaylord, Archival Products, University Products, they make these desiccant packs that are like activated charcoal, and so you can get one or a couple and put them in a bin with the objects and leave them, and hopefully the smell will be reduced.
And that's not anything you would want to do for long-term storage?
You could.
You could?
But eventually the desiccant packs will become inert. I mean, you might want to replace them, but it just may not be something that you need to do forever. It wouldn't be harmful, though.
Okay. And I don't know if you would have an answer to this question, because it's kind of 180 degrees of what you were talking about, but as I go through all of our stuff and trying to archive it, like, is there a recommendation for any like online, like as I have all this, I'm scanning everything, right? So once you have all of that information, is there like one or two like, I don't know, websites that you could recommend that is great to kind of house all of this stuff, whether it's like JPEGs or PDFs, just so it's kind of all in one place?
Yeah, I am, like you said, not the expert on this, but the librarians up on the 5th floor at the Digi Center, they are definitely the people to ask, but I can tell you what I know. Usually what's recommended for archival storage, digital archival storage, is that your files are physically stored somewhere, so on a hard drive, a solid-state hard drive, perhaps even 2 different hard drives stored in different places in case something happens to one of them, and in the cloud. So that's the general recommendation. And cloud services like Apple has a cloud storage service, Google has a cloud storage service. They're usually paid, so but they're all fine, as far as I know. So that's my very novice answer to that question. But the librarians on the 5th floor at the Digi Center, they are. If you have time today or another time, I would definitely just go and ask one of them at the reference desk, because they know they can give you an answer to this in much more colorful detail than I can.
What center?
The Digi Center. Yeah, it's on the 5th floor.
So I have a Zupu, which is a genealogy for Chinese, for the Gong family. And I decided, okay, I'm going to digitize it somehow. That is, basically, I scanned every page. That would have to be, I had to do 2 scans for one page. They kind of overlap. And I created all these files. So what I did was I put it on this, what software guys, we all do is we put it on our software on GitHub. And that's hosted by Microsoft right now because they bought it. And you can do it for free if you decide to do it, to publish it publicly. So I have the whole of that thing published on GitHub.
Okay, well, there's another option for you. GitHub, right? G-I-T, I've heard of it.
Yeah,
G-I-T-H-U-B.
Yes, GITHUB.com, I believe.
Any other questions? I don't have a slide for this, but if anybody has a burning question that they didn't ask me later, you can email preservationunit@sfpl.org. It's not up on the slide, sorry about that. It's preservationunit@sfpl.org. You can feel free to email me, and I'll get back to you as soon as I see it.
Okay, thank you everyone, and thank you, Elise.
Thank you.
So hopefully these Tuesdays presentations give you some tips how to research and how to preserve your materials and so forth. And for those of you who are interested, or if you know someone that we should invite next year or next time, please email me or any subject expert in different areas and so forth. Or what would you like to hear more or see next year or next time? So tell us, and we'll try to get that person or speakers to come